He slammed the folder onto the conference table so hard the water glasses shook. Kang Dai-jung, uncle, elder, and the man who believed he ran the Black Orchid Syndicate from the shadows, pointed one finger across the room at his nephew and said, in front of every lieutenant, every department head, and every person whose salary depended on that family name, "You are going to marry Lee Soo-yeon by the end of this month, or I will make sure every man in this room knows you are not fit to lead." The room went still. Naomi Carter, standing near the wall with a leather portfolio pressed against her chest, stopped breathing. 7 years she had worked for Kang Joon-ha. 7 years of early mornings, late nights, canceled holidays, and learning to read a man who showed the world nothing. She knew his coffee order, his silences, the exact way his jaw tightened when he was containing something he refused to say out loud. She knew him the way you know a place you have lived in so long you stop noticing it, until someone threatens to burn it down. And now she watched him sit there, perfectly still, while his uncle dismantled him in front of everyone. She wanted to say something. She said nothing. This is the story of what happened next. If you've ever loved someone you were never supposed to love, hit the like button right now. Drop your city or country in the comments, because I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe if you haven't already, because the story I'm about to tell you does not end where you think it ends. Stay with me until the last word. I promise you, it's worth it. Naomi had taken the job 7 years ago because she needed it, not because she wanted it. She had been 26, newly arrived in Seoul, her savings down to a number that gave her headaches when she looked at it. Her Korean was functional, not perfect, but enough. Her resume was solid, her references were impeccable, and when the recruitment call came through a corporate agency for an executive assistant position at KJH Holdings, she had treated it exactly like every other job she had ever taken, professionally, practically, without sentiment. Nobody told her who Kang Joon-ha actually was until her third day. It was Park Soo-jin from the legal department who pulled her aside near the copy room with the look of someone about to warn a tourist about a dangerous current in the water. "You know what this company is, right?" she said. Naomi had looked at her. "I was told it was an investment and logistics group." Park Soo-jin had laughed. Not unkindly, but not comfortably either. "It is, among other things." That was the most anyone would say directly. The rest Naomi pieced together over months. The visitors who didn't make appointments. The phone calls that happened in languages she wasn't supposed to understand and sometimes couldn't. The way certain men looked at Joon-ha when they entered a room, not with respect exactly, but with the particular alertness of people in the presence of something they could not afford to underestimate. She learned the shape of the Black Orchid Syndicate, the way you learn the shape of an iceberg, not by seeing it whole, but by watching how everything else moved around it. And she stayed. She had asked herself that question enough times to know the real answer wasn't simple. Part of it was practical. The salary was exceptional. The work was demanding in the specific way that kept her sharp, and Seoul had become home in ways she hadn't planned for. But part of it was him. Not in the way it would make a clean story. Not love at first sight. Not an immediate pull she could name. It was slower than that and more inconvenient. It was the accumulation of small observations she told herself she was making professionally, until the professional explanation stopped being enough. The way he noticed things. That was the part nobody else seemed to see. The world saw Kang Joon-ha the way his reputation designed him. Cold, controlled, capable of decisions that would make a lesser person lose sleep permanently. And he was those things. She was not naive about what he was capable of. But she had also watched him, one Thursday afternoon in her 4th month, quietly reroute a supply shipment so that a dock worker's family wouldn't lose their home because of an error that wasn't the dock worker's fault. He told no one. He did not enter it into any record she could find. He simply fixed it and moved on. She filed it away. Then there was the coffee. She had mentioned, once in passing, to no one in particular during a staff meeting about catering orders, that she didn't like the dark roast they'd been getting, that she found it too bitter, and that medium roast was easier for her to drink through a long morning. She had not been speaking to him. He had not appeared to be listening. He was looking at documents. 3 days later, the office kitchen had medium roast, and nobody could explain why the order had changed. He never mentioned it. She never asked. By the end of her first year, she understood something that she suspected would complicate the rest of her time in that building. Kang Junha paid attention to her in a way that he paid attention to very few things in his life. Not obviously. Not in any way she could have taken to another person and said, "Look, here is evidence of something." But she felt it the way you feel weather changing, in the pressure of the air before anything visible has shifted. She told herself it was professional attentiveness. He was meticulous. He was like that about everything. She was not entirely convinced, but it was a comfortable enough story to live inside. The women started arriving in her second year. Not arriving exactly. They had always been around, the daughters of business families, associates' sisters, women who moved through the corporate world with the specific ease of people who had never been told no about anything that mattered to them. But the second year was when they started coming specifically for him, specifically to that office, specifically in ways that made it clear the visit was a negotiation, wearing social clothing. The first one was a woman named Choi Ji-eun, daughter of a shipping magnate whose company had overlapping interests with 3 of KJH Holdings' subsidiary operations. She was beautiful in a polished, armor-like way, and she walked into Junha's office like she had already decided how the meeting would end. Naomi had brought in the tea tray. She had done it the same way she always did, efficiently, without commentary, setting the cups down and preparing to exit. But she caught, in the half-second before she turned away, the expression on Junha's face. Not dismissal exactly, more like a man reading a document he had already read before and finding nothing new in it. Choi Ji-eun left 40 minutes later. Her posture had changed. Naomi processed the follow-up scheduling requests, there were none, and moved on. The second woman came 3 months later. The third, 2 months after that. By the time Naomi had been in her role for 3 years, she had watched 8 women enter that office carrying the specific weight of intentions she was never asked to document. 8 women who represented family alliances, business mergers, political insulation, social credibility. 8 women who left without what they came for. The staff talked about it constantly, not to Naomi directly. They were never quite sure how to talk to her about him, whether she was an observer or something closer, but she heard it, the way you hear things in any office when you've worked there long enough to be part of the furniture. The prevailing theory was that he was simply incapable of it, that whatever made other men willing to negotiate the terms of sharing their lives with another person had been removed from him or had never been installed. Naomi did not share this theory, but she didn't share her own either. The uncle had been a fixture for as long as Naomi had worked there. Kang Dae-jung was 63, built like a man who had spent his life believing rooms belonged to him when he entered them, and possessed of an old guard conviction that the syndicate should be run the way it had been run under Junha's father, with family marriages, family alliances, and the kind of controlled dynasty-style power consolidation that had been obsolete for at least a decade, but remained Dae-jung's primary framework for understanding how the world should work. He had never been warm to Naomi. It wasn't overt. He was too calculated for overt. But there was a quality to the way he looked at her, when he looked at her at all, that communicated clearly that he considered her placement in that role a category error. An executive assistant should be Korean, should be from a family he knew, should represent something beyond functional competence. She represented, in his accounting, a failure of judgment on his nephew's part, a preference for efficiency over symbolism. He had said this once, almost, in a hallway conversation she had walked into by accident. He had stopped when he saw her. She had kept walking. She was good at that. But over the years she had watched Dae-jung's tolerance for the marriage situation deteriorate from a background complaint into something with sharper edges. He had started bringing it up in broader forms, in meetings that weren't really about that but became about it, in front of people who then had to decide whether to agree with him openly or stay quiet and agree with him privately. The syndicate had a structure, and at the top of that structure was Junha's authority, which was legitimate and absolute by every measure that mattered. But authority in an organization like the Black Orchid Syndicate was also social, also relational, also maintained through the visible performance of power in the forms that people inside the organization recognized. And one of those forms, one of the oldest and most deeply embedded, was the marriage alliance. Junha had refused to perform it, and Dae-jung had decided that this refusal was the opening he needed. The morning of the meeting, Naomi had 3 scheduling conflicts, a vendor dispute that had escalated overnight into something requiring Junha's direct attention, and a headache she was managing with bad coffee and Will. She had been in the building since 7. She was wearing a blazer she'd grabbed without checking the mirror, her hair pulled back in a way that was practical and nothing else. And she had her portfolio because she always had her portfolio in meetings, even when the meetings technically didn't require her to take notes. She sat near the wall. That was her place in large meetings, present but peripheral, the person who made sure things were recorded and that the logistics of the room served the needs of the man at the center of the table. Junha sat at the head. He looked, as he always looked in these rooms, like stillness had been engineered into him. His suit was dark, well-fitted without being ostentatious. His hands were flat on the table. His face was doing what his face always did in adversarial rooms, presenting exactly nothing. The meeting was supposed to be about a port contract in Busan. It was about the port contract for approximately 4 minutes. Then Kang Dae-jung set down his pen, looked at his nephew with the expression of a man who had been rehearsing this in private for months, and said the words, "You are destroying everything your father built because you refuse to choose a wife." The room responded to this the way rooms respond to something that has been in the air a long time finally being spoken aloud, with the specific stillness of people deciding very quickly whether to be invisible. Naomi pressed her portfolio to her chest. Junha did not look at his uncle immediately. He looked at the surface of the table for approximately 3 seconds, and Naomi, who had spent 7 years learning to read those 3 seconds, understood that he was doing the same thing he always did when someone said something he found beneath response. He was deciding whether to bother. He decided to bother. "The Busan contract," he said, "has a timeline issue in the 3rd clause. I want to address it before we table anything else." Dae-jung was not finished. "Every family we could have allied with, Choi, Lee, Han, Park, you have turned them away, one by one, for 7 years. The people in this room," and here he gestured broadly, capturing everyone, including Naomi near the wall, "deserve to know that the man they follow has a plan that extends beyond his own preferences." Someone cleared a throat. No one said anything. Junha's eyes moved, briefly and without particular expression, to Naomi. She looked down at her portfolio. She did not know what she looked like in that moment. She hoped she looked professional. She suspected she looked like someone trying very hard not to look like anything at all. "My assistant manages my schedule," Dae-jung continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone making an example. "Perhaps she can confirm that no such plan exists, that for 7 years the leadership of this syndicate has been conducted by a man who prefers—" "What exactly, Junha? The company of work?" Every head turned toward her. She had been in that room for 3 hours and had not been addressed directly until this moment. She had been furniture. Now she was a prop in someone else's argument. She raised her eyes. She looked at Dae-jung first, the face of a man who had decided she was useful for something and had reached for her without asking. And then, for 1 second that she would replay more times than she would ever admit, she looked at Junha. He was watching her. Not with urgency. Not with a signal or a direction. Just watching. The way he sometimes watched her when he thought she didn't notice. With an attention that was so steady and so contained that she had spent years deciding what to call it and had never landed on a word that fit without costs she wasn't ready to pay. She looked back at the room. "I manage Mr. Kang's schedule," she said. "His personal decisions aren't within my area of responsibility." It was the safest answer available. It was true. It was also, in some interior chamber of herself she kept locked, the least true thing she had said in years. Dae-jung made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "As I thought," he said. The meeting continued. The Busan contract was discussed. Decisions were made. Naomi took notes with the same focused precision she always brought to the work, because the work was something she could control, and right now control was the only thing between her and something she didn't have a name for yet. When the meeting ended and people began gathering their things, she kept her eyes on her portfolio. She heard chairs moving, conversations restarting at lower volumes, the specific acoustic shift of a room releasing the tension it had been holding. She heard, rather than saw, that Junha had not moved from his chair. Everyone else left. She was the last one in the room, and she didn't know why she hadn't left with the others, except that her body had made a decision her brain was still catching up to. She closed her portfolio. She looked up. Junha was still at the head of the table, his hands still flat in front of him, his eyes on the skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Seoul spread below in every direction, gray and lit and enormous, and he was looking at it the way she had seen him look at it before, not with ownership exactly, but with the particular exhaustion of a man who carried more than he had ever been designed to carry and had long since stopped looking for somewhere to set it down. She should have left. That would have been professional. That would have been appropriate. "Are you all right?" she said. The question surprised her almost as much as it seemed to surprise him. He turned from the window slowly, and she watched his face do the thing it did when it was deciding which version of itself to show. The process was usually invisible, but today she could see the machinery of it, because whatever had just happened in that meeting had cost him something, and the cost had made the machinery visible. "I'm fine," he said. She looked at him. "Don't do that," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Do what?" "The face," she said. "The one that says everything is fine when everything is clearly not fine. You do it in every meeting where someone says something you don't want to react to. I've been watching it for 7 years. I know what it looks like." Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically. This was Kang Jun-ha. He did nothing dramatically when there was an audience of any size. But it shifted, and she felt the shift in her chest the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. "You've been watching me for 7 years, he said. It wasn't quite a question. "It's my job to anticipate your needs in meetings," she said. "That requires observation." "Right," he said. They looked at each other across the empty conference table. Outside, Seoul continued its enormous, indifferent business. Inside, something that had been building for 7 years without either of them acknowledging it was doing what built things eventually do, pressing against its container, finding the places where the container was weakest, looking for a way through. Naomi picked up her portfolio. "The Busan contract needs your signature on the amended clause before end of business tomorrow," she said. "I'll have the corrected version on your desk by 4. "Naomi." She stopped. She didn't turn around immediately. She gave herself 2 seconds. The same 2 seconds she had been giving herself for years whenever he said her name in a tone that was not the professional tone. The 2 seconds where she talked herself out of whatever her body was trying to tell her. Then she turned. He was looking at her with the expression she had no word for, the one she had been filing away and not naming for 7 years. "Thank you," he said, "for what you said in there." "I told the truth," she said. "I know," he said. "That's what I'm thanking you for." She left. In the elevator, going down, she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and stared at the floor indicator and told herself firmly, clearly, and with the full weight of 7 years of practiced rationality, that nothing had changed. She was almost sure she believed it. She took the long way back to her desk. It wasn't something she decided consciously. Her feet just refused the direct route, the one that would have taken her past the glass wall of the executive corridor where anyone still lingering after the meeting could have seen her face. She went instead through the side hallway near the stairwell, the one that smelled faintly of old carpet and the cleaning solution the overnight crew used, and she walked slowly enough that by the time she reached her workstation, the expression she'd been carrying since the conference room had been packed away somewhere functional. She sat down. She opened her laptop. She pulled up the Busan contract. The words didn't resolve for almost a full minute. She had told the truth in there. That was what she kept returning to, not the way he'd said her name or the expression she refused to name, but the specific texture of what she'd said. "His personal decisions aren't within my area of responsibility. Clean, accurate, professionally airtight, and at the same time the most dishonest sentence she had constructed in recent memory, because the truth, the real, inconvenient, 7 years accumulated truth, was that she had spent an embarrassing portion of her adult life being affected by the personal decisions of Kang Jun-ha in ways that had nothing to do with scheduling. She found the 3rd clause. She flagged the amendment language. She did her job. At 6:47, the office had thinned to the skeleton crew that stayed late by necessity rather than ambition. The cleaners moved through the far end of the floor. Someone in accounting was still at their desk, visible through the glass partition, staring at something on their screen with the hollow focus of a person who had stopped actually seeing it an hour ago. Naomi was packaging the contract amendment into a folder for Junha's desk when she heard the voices. Not loud. The building had good walls and most of the sound got absorbed by the carpeting and the climate system. But the executive corridor had a particular acoustic property near the corner turn. She had discovered it in her first year by accident, where sound traveled in ways the architects probably hadn't intended. She wasn't trying to listen. She was walking. She heard Daijung say, "You made yourself look weak." She stopped. She should have kept walking. 7 years of professional discipline said keep walking, because whatever was being said in that corridor was not her business. And she was not the kind of person who stood in hallways, absorbing conversations that weren't meant for her. She stood very still. Junha's voice, when it came, was so controlled it was almost frightening. "I made myself look exactly like a man who refuses to be managed." That's not what the room saw. Then the room was watching for the wrong things. A pause. She could hear Daijung shifting, his weight, his posture, the particular physical adjustment of a man who had just decided to change tactics. "Lee Soo-yeon is still available," Daijung said. "Her father called this morning. He is willing to extend the proposal through the end of the quarter. This is not a punishment, Junha. This is an opportunity. The Lee family controls 4 port operations on the southern coast. The alliance would— I know what the alliance would do." "Then you understand why this conversation keeps happening." "I understand that you keep having it," Junha said, "because you believe eventually I'll run out of reasons to say no." Another pause. "Won't you?" Dae-jung said. The silence after that lasted long enough that Naomi realized she had been holding her breath and made herself stop doing it, slowly, quietly, through her nose. "Go home, uncle," Junha said. "I'll see you Thursday." She heard footsteps, Dae-jung's, heavier and more deliberate than his nephew's, coming toward the corridor junction. She was already moving, already 3 steps away and aimed at the opposite direction, portfolio under her arm, pace brisk and purposeful, when he rounded the corner and saw her. He stopped. She nodded at him. "Mr. Kang." The courtesy title without the first name, a distinction she maintained in all her interactions with him because the other option was using his given name. And something about that had always felt like a mistake she could still avoid making. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she knew and had never liked, the one that was calculating the information available from her presence in this hallway at this hour, assembling it into a theory he had probably already formed. "Still working," he said. "Not a question." "Busan contract amendment," she said. "I was going to leave it on Mr. Kang's desk." She meant Junha. Dae-jung knew she meant Junha. The whole building knew she meant Junha when she said that. He looked at the folder. He looked at her. He said, with the precision of someone placing a piece on a board, "You've worked here a long time, Ms. Carter." 7 years, she said. 7 years, he repeated as though the number itself was an argument. "You must have noticed things in that time, about how this organization works, about what it needs." She held his gaze. She was good at holding gazes with people who used eye contact as leverage. She had learned it in this building, in this job, from watching the man his nephew was. "I've noticed a great deal," she said, "most of it confidential." Something moved across his face, not quite amusement, not quite irritation, something in between, with a cold bottom to it. "Of course," he said. He adjusted his cuffs. He was a man who wore his suits like armor and touched them when he wanted to remind himself the armor was still on. "Good night, Ms. Carter." "Good night," she said. She walked to Junha's office. She placed the folder on his desk. She left without looking back. In the elevator going down, she thought about the way Dae-jung had said 7 years, and the way it had felt like a net being tested for hold strength. And she thought about what she would do if she were being calculated against in a game whose rules she had never been shown. She thought about it all the way to the subway. She thought about it through 2 transfers and a 20-minute ride, and the walk from the station to her apartment. She thought about it standing in her kitchen in the dark, not eating, not turning on the lights, just standing there with her hand on the counter and the city noise coming through the window like it always did, constant and indifferent, and somehow still the sound that most felt like home. She thought, he knows something, or he suspects something, or he's looking for something to know. She thought, there is nothing to know. She thought, that's not entirely true. She turned on the lights. She made rice. She ate standing at the counter because sitting down would have made the evening feel too much like something she needed to recover from, and she was not ready to admit that. She arrived the next morning at 7:12, which was 4 minutes later than her usual time, and she noticed in the way she noticed everything about that building, that Junha's office light was already on. He was always early, she knew this. But there was something about the light being on before she arrived that morning that felt different. The way ordinary things sometimes felt different after you'd spent a night reassembling your own professional composure. She put her bag down. She reviewed the morning schedule. She made coffee, medium roast for herself, and then, because it was a Tuesday, and on Tuesdays he had back-to-back calls starting at 9, she made enough for two and brought a second cup to his office door. She knocked. "Come in." He was at his desk, jacket on already, reading something she couldn't see the face of. The desk lamp was on, but the overhead lights were off, and the room had a quality in that early light. Seoul still gray outside the windows, the day not fully committed to itself yet, that made it feel a few degrees away from the rest of the building. She set the coffee on the corner of his desk where she always set it. He looked up. Something in his face was different, not dramatically. This was still the man who had turned restraint into a professional skill, but different in the way his face had been different yesterday, in the conference room when the meeting had cost him something visible. Like a layer of the usual insulation had been removed and he hadn't gotten around to replacing it yet. "Thank you," he said. She nodded. She turned to go. "Naomi." She stopped. Same as yesterday, same 2 seconds. She was starting to think those 2 seconds were going to become the defining unit of her existence. She turned. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. He looked at her for a moment without speaking, and she waited, because in 7 years she had learned that Kang Junha said important things at his own pace, and rushing it produced nothing useful. "My uncle spoke to you last night," he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't treat it as one. "Briefly, in the corridor." "What did he say?" "He observed that I've worked here a long time." She paused. "He said it in a way that meant something else." Junha's jaw shifted slightly. "What else?" "I think he was looking for a particular kind of confirmation," she said, "about whether I know things that could be useful to him." "Do you?" She looked at him steadily. "I know a great deal about your schedule, your communication patterns, your operational preferences, and the way you structure your decision-making process. All of which I would describe as confidential and none of which I've shared with anyone in this building or outside of it." He held her gaze. "That's not what I'm asking." The room was quiet. The city outside was doing its morning things. She could hear the distant sound of something large moving through traffic, the specific soul sound of infrastructure operating at scale. "Then ask me what you're actually asking," she said. His jaw tightened. "Do you understand what he's doing?" "Yes," she said. "He's building a case. He's been building it for at least 2 years, maybe longer. The marriage proposals aren't really about marriage, or they're not only about that. They're about demonstrating that you have a weakness, a gap in your judgment, something that can be used to argue that the leadership of this organization should be redistributed." She stopped. "I think you know all of this already." "I do," he said. "Then why are you telling me?" He looked at his coffee. He looked at his hands. He looked out the window at Seoul, and she watched the profile of his face do something complicated that she had no word for. "Because you're the only person in this building I trust," he said. The sentence landed in the room and sat there. She didn't know what to do with it. She had spent 7 years constructing a professional framework sturdy enough to contain most of what happened in that office. But this sentence was not fitting inside any framework she had built. It was too simple to be deflected. It was too direct to be answered with the vocabulary she normally used in this room. "That's a significant thing to say," she managed. "I'm aware," he said. "I'm your assistant." "I know what you are," he said, and then quieter. "I also know what you're not." The silence after that was different from the silences she was used to in that office. The usual silences were professional. The silence of a man thinking, deciding, processing information. This one had a different pressure to it. It pressed against the walls of the room in a way that made the room feel smaller without anything changing physically. She looked at her watch. She looked at the door. She looked back at him. "You have calls starting at 9, she said. "I'll make sure the line is clear." She left. She did not take the long way back to her desk this time. She went directly, sat down, and spent 3 minutes staring at her screen before anything on it made any sense. "The only person in this building I trust." She was going to need more coffee. The Lee Soo-yeon meeting happened on a Wednesday, 11 days after the conference room. Naomi had not scheduled it. That was the first unusual thing. It appeared on Junha's calendar via Dae-jung's office, added by Dae-jung's assistant, which was technically within the uncle's administrative authority and was also, technically, a minor act of territorial violation that Naomi had filed away the moment she noticed it. She did not cancel it. It was not her place to cancel it. She reviewed the entry, confirmed the time, and prepared the meeting room the way she prepared all meeting rooms. Water, the appropriate number of chairs, the temperature set to what she had learned over years was Junha's preference in rooms where he was managing an uncomfortable situation. She stayed at her desk when Lee Soo-yeon arrived. Soo-yeon was 29, the daughter of a man whose name appeared frequently in conversations Naomi wasn't supposed to be having. She was poised in a way that looked effortless and wasn't. Naomi recognized the effort because she had spent years learning to look effortless in this building and knew what it cost. Soo-yeon walked through the executive floor with the particular confidence of someone who had been told this meeting would go a certain way and believed it. Naomi looked at her screen. The meeting lasted 51 minutes. Naomi knew because she tracked his schedule with the precision that the job required and because if she was being honest with herself in the privacy of her own head, paying attention in a way that was not entirely professional. Soo-yeon came out of the meeting room with a different posture than she'd gone in with. Not shattered. The woman had too much composure for shattered, but recalibrated. The specific recalibration of someone who had run their preparation against reality and found the gap. Naomi did not look up, but she heard it. The particular cadence of heels on executive floor carpeting when the person wearing them has just been told no. The pace that's slightly faster than it needs to be, but not quite fast enough to look like a retreat. Then she heard something else. Dae-jung's voice from the far end of the corridor where his own office was. Low. Not angry yet, but building toward it, the way a temperature builds. And Soo-yeon's voice responding, quieter, and then Dae-jung again. And this time the words made it through the ambient noise of the floor with enough clarity that she caught them. Doesn't matter what he wants, it matters what this organization needs, and if he won't listen to reason. The rest was lost to a passing cart from the mailroom. Naomi picked up her phone. She put it down. She thought about the 7 years she had been sitting in this chair and what it meant that she was now, apparently, a piece on a board in a game she had never agreed to play. She opened a new document. She started listing, quietly, methodically, everything she knew. Not as evidence, not as a weapon. Just because she was the kind of person who needed to understand the shape of a thing before she could decide how to stand in relation to it. By the time she finished, the list was longer than she expected. Oh, he came to find her at 5. Not the other way around. He came to her desk, which he did occasionally for operational reasons, and which always caused a minor atmospheric shift in whatever part of the floor he moved through. Because Kang Junha in motion was a particular kind of event, and everyone in the building had been trained by experience to notice it. He sat in the chair across from her desk, the one usually occupied by whoever was being given instructions, and he looked at her in a way that said he had been thinking about something for a while and had decided to stop thinking about it alone. She told my uncle I was in a relationship, he said. Naomi looked up from her screen. Soo-yeon? She told him that was the reason for the refusal, that there was someone. He paused. She guessed, or she observed something in the meeting that led her to that conclusion. Either way, Naomi set down her pen very carefully. Is that a problem? It's going to be one, he said. My uncle is going to start looking for whoever she thinks it is. And when he starts looking, he stopped. He looked at his hands, then at her. There are things he could find that he would use, not because they're what he thinks they are, because they'd be close enough. The air in the room changed. She understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, what he was saying. Not that there was something to find, not exactly, or rather, not that it was what Dae-jung would make it out to be. But there were 7 years of small things. The coffee. The rerouted shipment she had noticed and never mentioned. The way he said her name in certain tones, and she heard it differently depending on the tone. The way she knew which silences to fill and which to leave alone. 7 years of texture that, assembled by someone who was looking for something specific, could be shaped into a particular story. The story that Dae-jung would use to take apart everything Junha had built. What do you want to do? she said. He looked at her. I want to tell you something that I probably should have told you a long time ago. Her heart was doing something she would have preferred it not to do. She kept her face professional. She was very good at keeping her face professional. It was possibly the primary skill she had developed in this building over 7 years, and she was grateful for it right now in a way she had never been grateful for it before. All right, she said. He opened his mouth. His phone rang. He looked at it. His expression shifted into something flat and controlled, the professional mask coming down over whatever had been there a second ago with the speed of long practice. He read the screen. He looked back at her. It's Dae-jung, he said. She said nothing. He answered it. He spoke for 40 seconds in the clipped, neutral tone he used for conversations he wanted to end quickly. He hung up. He stood. My uncle has called a leadership meeting, he said. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. He straightened his jacket. The mask was fully in place now. The composed, untouchable face of the man who ran the Black Orchid Syndicate. The face that didn't show anything it hadn't decided to show. He's putting the marriage question to a formal vote. Naomi sat very still. He can do that, she said. Technically, he said. Under the founding charter, senior council members can call a vote of confidence on any leadership decision that affects organizational stability. It's never been invoked against the head of the syndicate, but it exists. His voice was very even. My uncle has been patient for a long time. He's done being patient. She looked up at him. What happens if the vote goes against you? It won't, he said. What happens if it does? She said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then the council takes advisory authority over my personal decisions, including who I marry. He said it the way you say a thing you've already made peace with, and something about that, the peace in it, the exhaustion underneath the peace, was harder to look at than anything he had shown her in 7 years. She stood up. She wasn't sure why she stood up. It didn't accomplish anything. It just felt wrong to be sitting while he was standing, while he was looking like that. Tell me what you need, she said. He looked at her, really looked at her, the way he had looked at her in the conference room yesterday, the way she had been filing away and not naming, and he said, I need you to come to that meeting tomorrow. I'm always at the meetings, she said. Not like that, he said. Not near the wall. He paused. Beside me. The air in the room thinned. She understood what he was saying. Beside him wasn't beside him as an assistant. It wasn't a scheduling function or a note-taking function. Beside him in that room, tomorrow morning, in front of the full senior council while his uncle moved to strip him of authority over his own life, meant something that could not be walked back once it was done. Something that would change the shape of everything that came after it. She held his gaze. She had 7 years of practice holding his gaze, and it had never felt like this. Like standing at the edge of something she had been circling for so long that she had forgotten she was circling it and had started to believe she was just standing still. All right, she said. He nodded once. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame, his back to her, and she watched the muscles of his shoulders shift under the jacket with the specific tension of a man holding something in. Naomi, he said, without turning around. Yes. When this is over, he said, I'm going to finish what I was going to say to you tonight. He left. She stood beside her desk in the emptying office and listened to his footsteps recede down the corridor and thought about the word when. Not if, not maybe, not a suggestion. When, stated with the quiet certainty of a man who had already decided how the rest of this was going to go, and found that she had absolutely no professional framework left that was capable of containing what that word did to her. She did not sleep well. That was not unusual. She was not a person who slept easily when there were unresolved variables in her life, and her life currently contained more unresolved variables than she had filing capacity for. But this was a different quality of sleeplessness than the professional kind. This was the kind that came from the body knowing something the mind hadn't finished processing yet, the kind that kept pulling her back from the edge of sleep with the specific anxiety of someone who has agreed to something they cannot take back. When this is over, I'm going to finish what I was going to say to you tonight. She had replayed it approximately 40 times by 3 in the morning, not the words themselves. She had the words memorized after the second replay, but the way he'd said them. Standing in the doorway with his back to her, his hand on the frame, his voice carrying that particular quality of a decision already made and simply being stated as fact. When, not if. She got up at 5. She showered. She chose her clothes with more attention than she usually gave them, then felt foolish for doing so, then chose something else entirely because the first choice had been made for the wrong reasons, and she was not going to walk into that meeting having dressed for anything other than work. She arrived at 6:48. His office light was on. She did not go to him first. She went to her desk, reviewed the morning's documentation, confirmed that the full senior council had received their meeting notice. Dae-Young's assistant had sent them, she noted, not through the standard channels, which told her the uncle had been moving on this for longer than one phone call. And then she made coffee and sat with it and thought carefully about what the next 2 hours would require of her. Beside him. Not near the wall. She knew what it meant. She had known the moment he said it, and she had said all right, and now she was sitting in the early morning quiet of a building that didn't know yet what was going to happen in its 8th-floor conference room. And she was asking herself if she was prepared for the version of her life that existed on the other side of that room. She was still asking when his office door opened and he walked out. He was dressed in charcoal, which was not his usual meeting color. He typically wore black for confrontational meetings. She had noticed this over years without ever articulating why she noticed it. Charcoal meant something different. Charcoal meant he was not going in as a threat. He was going in as a man who had decided he no longer needed to perform power for people who were about to find out exactly what his power consisted of. He saw her. He stopped. "You're early," he said. "I'm always early," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and she saw it again. That thing in his face that had no insulation over it this morning. The thing she had been refusing to name for 7 years. Sitting right there on the surface of him, like he had decided overnight that the effort of covering it was no longer worth the energy. "How are you?" he said. "Ask me after the meeting," she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. She could count on one hand the number of times she had seen him actually smile, and none of them had been in a building full of people. But the motion that happened in his face when a smile was what he was containing. "Fair," he said. They walked to the conference room together, not side by side in the way they usually walked, the professional configuration, her half a step behind, but level, which was different enough from their established pattern that she felt the difference in her chest. 2 people walking into the same room at the same height. The council was already assembling when they arrived. There were 11 senior council members, not counting Junha himself, and not counting Dae-Young, who stood at the far end of the room with his hands clasped behind his back in the posture of a man who believed he had already won. The room had a different energy from the operational meetings Naomi was used to, tighter, more charged, the specific electricity of a gathering where everyone present knows that something is going to be decided that cannot be undecided. She walked in beside him. She felt it, the moment the room registered it. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way a group of people process a deviation from established pattern. Small adjustments in posture, micro-redirections of attention, the barely perceptible recalibration of several people trying to understand what they were seeing. She had been in this room 100 times near the wall. She pulled out the chair to Junha's right and sat in it. The silence that produced was approximately 3 seconds long and felt significantly longer. Dae-Young looked at her, then he looked at his nephew. His expression was controlled. He was good at controlled. It was the family trait. But something underneath the control had shifted, some calculation being rapidly revised. "We have an unusual configuration this morning," he said. He was speaking to the room, but he was looking at Junha. "We have the standard configuration," Junha said. He had not sat down yet. He stood at the head of the table with both hands resting on the back of his chair, and his voice was so completely without defensiveness that it functioned almost as aggression. The complete absence of apology for a thing that required no apology. "Miss Carter is my executive assistant. Her presence in my meetings is standard. Beside you," Dae-Young said, "is not standard." "Then today is different," Junha said, and sat down. Naomi placed her hands flat on the table in front of her and kept her breathing even, and did not look at anyone except the documents she had arranged in front of her, which were real documents with real content that she had brought, because her hands needed something to do, and because walking into this room with nothing in front of her would have made her feel exposed in a way she wasn't willing to be. Dae-Young let it go. For now. He opened the meeting the way he had clearly been rehearsing. Formal procedural language, the specific vocabulary of the founding charter, the 3 sections relevant to the vote of confidence he was calling. He was thorough. She had to give him that. He had done the work. He knew the language and he used it precisely. And as he spoke, she watched the council members' faces and saw what he had also clearly already done. He had talked to them individually. She could see it in the way their expressions were not surprised by anything he was saying, the way you're not surprised by a movie you've already seen the trailer for. He had been building this for months. The vote of confidence motion was formally introduced at 8:17. It required a seconded, and she watched 2 hands go up simultaneously, Min Jun-seok and Hwang Byung-chul, who were the 2 members most closely aligned with the families whose marriage proposals had been rejected. Noted. Junha said nothing through this. He sat with the same stillness she had watched him maintain in 100 rooms, his hands on the table, his eyes moving through the assembled faces with the quiet, methodical attention of someone cataloging information. Then Dae-jung said the part he had been building toward. "The question before this council is not personal," he said. "I want to be clear about that. The question is whether the leadership of the Black Orchid Syndicate is operating with the stability and the strategic vision that this organization requires. And I am going to present evidence," he used that word, evidence, placing it carefully, "that suggests it is not." He opened a folder. He slid a document to the center of the table. Naomi looked at it. She looked at it for 2 seconds before she understood what she was looking at, and then she went very still in a way that was different from her professional stillness. This was the stillness of something stopping, some internal process that had been running for 7 years, hitting a wall, and not knowing what to do next. It was a photograph. Her and Junha. In the corridor outside his office, 3 weeks ago. It was not a dramatic photograph. Nothing was happening in it that could not be explained professionally. But the angle was wrong. It was shot from above, through the glass panel at the top of the corridor wall, and whatever was happening in the image was something that had not been visible to anyone walking past, and had therefore not been moderated by either of them. He was standing close to her. His hand was not touching her, but it was near her in a way that, at that particular angle, in that particular light, told a story that Naomi had been very careful not to let exist in any visible form for 7 years. The story it told was the truth. That was the worst part. She heard the low sound of council members absorbing the image. Not loud. These were not men who made loud sounds about things, but the particular quality of attention shifting in a room when something has been placed in it that changes the air. Dae-jung said, "There are 14 photographs, some of them more instructive than this one. I have also obtained communication records from the internal server." He paused. "I'm not suggesting that a relationship of this nature is the only reason for my nephew's refusal to pursue a marriage alliance. I'm suggesting that it is one reason, and I'm suggesting that this council has a right to know when personal entanglements are affecting organizational decisions." The room was completely silent. Naomi looked at Junha. His face was doing something she had never seen it do. Not anger. She had seen his anger, and it was cold and controlled and targeted. This was different. This was the expression of a man who has just watched something he was protecting be reached for by someone who understood exactly what they were reaching for. He looked at her. She looked back at him. She thought, he didn't know about the photographs. She could see it. He hadn't known, and he was recalculating in real time. And under the recalculation, there was something that looked very much like a man discovering a wound he hadn't felt the moment it was made. She looked back at Dae-jung. "May I see them?" she said. Every head turned toward her. Dae-jung looked at her with an expression that was almost appreciative, the way a chess player appreciates an unexpected move even when it's against them. "Ms. Carter, the photographs," she said. "You said 14. I'd like to see the rest of them." "This is a council matter. I'm in the photographs," she said. "That makes them my matter as well." The room was very still. Dae-jung looked at his nephew. Junha had not spoken since the photographs were introduced. He was watching Naomi with the same total attention he had given her in the corridor last night, and in the elevator, and in every moment over 7 years when he thought she wasn't looking, and now he wasn't hiding it because there was nothing left in this room to hide it from. Dae-jung slid the folder across the table. She opened it. She went through the photographs methodically, one by one, the way she went through any document that required her full understanding before she responded to it. They were all from the same ceiling angle camera, which meant there was a surveillance installation in the executive corridor that was not on the official building security plan she maintained. She filed that information away. The images spanned approximately 6 weeks. Some were mundane, her bringing documents to his office, the two of them walking to meetings. But 3 of them were not mundane. 3 of them had been shot on evenings when the floor was largely empty, and in those 3 images the proximity was different, and the way he was looking at her was different, and there was nothing in any of them that she could call compromising, but there was something in all 3 that she could not call professional. She closed the folder. She placed it flat on the table. She looked at Dae-jung. "Who installed the camera?" she said. He said nothing. "The building security plan I maintain lists 11 cameras on this floor," she said. "The angle these were taken from is not one of the 11 positions. That means there is an unauthorized surveillance installation in the executive corridor of this building." She kept her voice the same temperature it always was in meetings. "I'd like to know who authorized it." Dae-jung's expression shifted. "The provenance of the images is not—" "It is relevant," she said, "to whether this council is looking at evidence or at material obtained through unauthorized corporate surveillance, which is a different legal category." She paused. "Mr. Kang," she meant Junha, "would you like me to contact the building security firm to pull the installation log for the corridor camera system? I can have that information by end of business today." Junha looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said. It was the first word he had spoken since the photographs appeared. Dae-jung's jaw tightened. "You are derailing a legitimate council proceeding. I am doing my job," Naomi said. "My job is to support Mr. Kang's operations and protect the integrity of his working environment. An unauthorized surveillance installation in the executive corridor is a direct threat to operational security. That's not a personal matter. That's an organizational matter." She looked at the council members, went through them one by one, holding each pair of eyes long enough to mean something. "Unless this council believes that unauthorized surveillance of the chief executive's workspace is acceptable practice, in which case I'd like that position stated clearly so that it can be documented." The room did not produce that position. Min Jun-seok looked at his hands. Hwang Byung-chul looked at the wall. Dae-jung set down his pen. His hands were very still and very controlled, and underneath the control she could see for the first time the specific tension of a man whose plan has encountered something he did not account for. "The vote of confidence motion," he began. "Stands on what evidence?" Junha said. The room turned to him. He had not raised his voice. He never raised his voice in these rooms. It was one of the things she had always respected about him, the understanding that volume was for people who needed help being taken seriously. He simply spoke, at his usual register, with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on his uncle, and the quality of his attention was so complete and so cold that the room temperature seemed to drop 2 degrees. "You have photographs of my assistant and me in a professional environment," he said, "taken through a camera that should not exist. You have communication records from the internal server, which you have accessed, and I will be finding out how, without my authorization. And you are presenting this to a council vote as evidence of a personal entanglement affecting organizational decisions." He paused. "What decision, specifically, do you believe has been compromised?" Dae-jung said, "The marriage alliances are not organizational decisions," Junha said. "They are not operational. They are not financial. They are not strategic in any measurable sense. They are social arrangements preferred by the families whose proposals I declined and preferred by you, and that preference does not constitute organizational necessity." He looked around the table. "The Busan port contract closes next week and will generate more revenue than the combined business brought in by the Choi, Lee, and Han families in the last 3 years. The restructuring I initiated in the southern operations has eliminated 2 significant financial exposures that this council was not fully informed of. The organization is in a better position than it has been in a decade. On what grounds are we discussing my fitness to lead?" The silence was different now. She could feel it. The shift in the room's center of gravity, the subtle repositioning of people who had come in leaning one way and were now recalculating. This was what she had watched him do in 100 meetings over 7 years. Not overpower a room, but simply make it very difficult for the room to maintain a position it couldn't defend. Dae-jung knew it too. She could see him knowing it. the specific readjustment of a man who has watched the ground shift under his prepared argument. He did what calculated men do when their primary argument loses footing. He went for the secondary. "You have feelings for your assistant," he said, simply. Without the procedural language now, just the direct statement, said to the room but meant for his nephew. "I am not accusing you of misconduct. I am stating that you have allowed a personal attachment to cloud your judgment about the best interests of this organization for years, and that this council has a right to address it." The room waited. Junha looked at his uncle. He looked at him for a long time, and then he said, quietly, without breaking eye contact, without any of the professional armor that he normally carried in rooms like this, "Yes." Naomi stopped breathing. "Yes," he said again. "I do." He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on Dai Jung, and his voice was even and his face was clear, and he was doing something she had never seen him do in any room in 7 years. He was being completely, straightforwardly, without tactical construction, honest. "I have had feelings for Naomi Carter for years. That is accurate. And I'm telling you that in this room, in front of this council, because I am done operating as though it is something I should be ashamed of, or that constitutes a weakness in my judgment." He paused. "She is the most competent person in this building. She has handled the operational requirements of my office with a standard of excellence that none of you have ever had to consider because the results simply appear. She has been loyal, precise, and trustworthy in circumstances that tested all 3 of those qualities. And the fact that I also love her," the word landed in the room like something dropped from a height, "does not diminish her professional merit or compromise my organizational judgment. It means I am a person with appropriate human responses, which is not a disqualifying condition for leadership as far as I am aware." Naomi's hands were flat on the table. She could feel the edge of the folder under her fingertips. She was looking at the middle distance, at the surface of the table just past her documents, because if she looked at him right now, she was not going to be able to maintain the composure that this room required, and she was not going to give a single person at this table the satisfaction of watching her lose it. Love her. The word was sitting in the room. He had said it. In this room. In front of 11 council members and his uncle and the security camera that was probably still running in the ceiling somewhere, and the full weight of an organization that had spent 7 years watching for a weakness in him to exploit. He had said it like it was simply a true thing. Dae-jung said, "You understand what you've just done." "I understand exactly what I've done," Junha said. "This changes nothing about the vote." "Then call it," Junha said. "Call the vote right now, and let every person in this room put their name to it." The room did not move. Dae-jung looked at Min Jun-seok. Min Jun-seok looked at his folder. Hwang Byung-chul was looking at the window. The vote did not happen. Not because Dae-jung had given up. She knew him well enough to know he had not given up, that what was happening was tactical withdrawal, the regrouping of a man who has used his prepared position and needs to find the next one. But because in that moment, in that room, calling the vote would have meant asking 11 men to formally state that a CEO should be removed for admitting he loved someone. And the structural absurdity of that statement was too visible in the silence for anyone to be the first to say it. The meeting ended without resolution at 9:43. People left in small groups. The conversations that started in the room continued in the corridor, in lower voices, with the specific discretion of people who needed to decide what their positions were before they stated them. Naomi did not move from her chair. The room emptied until there were 3 people in it, herself, Junha, and Dae-jung, who had not moved from his end of the table and was watching his nephew with the expression of a man who has lost a battle and is already planning the next engagement. "This isn't finished," Dae-jung said. "No," Junha said, "it isn't." Dae-jung looked at Naomi. He looked at her for a long time, in the specific calculating way he had looked at her in the corridor 11 days ago when he said 7 years like it was a net he was testing. "I hope you understand," he said to her, with a courtesy so precise it was indistinguishable from threat, "that what happens to this organization in the next few weeks will be partly a consequence of what happened in this room today." She met his eyes. She held them. "I understand a great deal, Mr. Kong," she said, "including things that aren't in your photographs." Something shifted in his face, a crack in the calculation, brief and immediately recovered. He picked up his folder. He left. The door closed. Naomi sat in the silence of the empty room for approximately 5 seconds, and then she put her hands over her face, not to cry. She was not going to cry in this building. She had made that decision 7 years ago, and she was keeping it. But because she needed 5 seconds where she was not performing composure for anyone. 5 seconds. Then she put her hands down. Junha was watching her from the other end of the table. She looked at him across the length of it. 7 years. 7 years of this table between them in one form or another, the professional distance she had measured and maintained and told herself was appropriate and sustainable and not costing her anything significant. "You said it," she said. "I said it," he said. "In front of all of them." "Yes." She looked at the folder on the table in front of her, at the photographs inside it, at the evidence of 7 years of small moments assembled by someone looking for a weapon and accidentally producing instead an archive of something true. "He's going to come back harder," she said. "I know." The camera means there are people inside the building working with him, not just aligned with him politically, actively working with him, gathering material. "I know that too. We need to know who they are before he makes his next move." Junha stood up. He walked around the table, not quickly, the unhurried pace of a man who has stopped pretending to be in less of a hurry than he is. And he stopped when he reached her chair, and he looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and there was no table between them, and no professional distance, and no 7 years of carefully maintained appropriate space. "I need to tell you something first," he said. "You told the whole council." "Not that," he said. "The other thing. The thing I was going to tell you last night before the phone rang." He crouched down so he was at her eye level, which was something she had never seen him do for anyone, and which produced in her chest a sensation she had no existing category for. His voice dropped. The proposals weren't just about families trying to form alliances. Some of them, 3 of them, were specifically designed as infiltration attempts. The families involved have been working with someone inside the syndicate to position a spouse in the household as an information channel. He held her eyes. "I've known about it for 18 months. She went still. "The reason I couldn't explain publicly why I was refusing," he said, "is that the investigation into who inside the syndicate is coordinating with those families is still ongoing. If I disclose the infiltration attempt, whoever is running it from the inside would disappear." He paused. "I've been building a case, quietly, for 18 months. She looked at him. "And you couldn't tell me." "I couldn't tell anyone who could be targeted," he said, "including you, especially you, because if they suspected I trusted you with it, you would have become a target." She thought about Dai Jung in the corridor, 7 years said in the tone of a net being tested. She thought about the unauthorized camera. She thought about the communication records pulled from the internal server without authorization. She said, "Is your uncle the inside contact?" Junha looked at her. "Or is he being used by whoever is?" she said. The question sat in the empty room, and she watched him. The man who controlled an empire, who had spent 18 months building a case in silence, who had just declared himself in front of a council room full of people who would use it against him. She watched him arrive at the edge of the answer and stay there for a moment. And what she saw in his face was not the composure of a man who had a plan. It was the face of a man who had just realized the plan was no longer enough. "I don't know," he said, "and that's the problem." She spent the rest of that morning building a list. Not the soft kind, not the list she'd made 2 nights ago in her apartment, the one that was really just her trying to understand the shape of a threat. This one was operational. Names, dates, access points, behavioral patterns. She pulled it from 7 years of accumulated observation, and she put it on paper, and she looked at it, and she thought, someone in this building has been feeding information out for at least 18 months, probably longer, long enough to know where to put a camera, long enough to pull server records without triggering a security flag, long enough to know which families to approach, and in what order. That wasn't improvised. That was a structure. She called the building security firm at 10:15 and requested the full installation log for the executive floor camera system. The woman on the other end put her on hold for 4 minutes and came back with a response that told her everything she needed to know before the woman finished the sentence. The log for that floor segment had been accessed and partially overwritten 3 weeks ago. A maintenance ticket existed. The technician's credentials were valid. The technician's credentials were valid because they belonged to a real employee who had reported them stolen 6 months ago. The report had been filed internally and had not been escalated. She asked who received the internal report. The answer was Hwang Byung-chul's administrative office. She wrote it down. She kept her face completely neutral and her voice completely professional, and she thanked the woman and ended the call and sat for exactly 12 seconds doing nothing, because 12 seconds was what she allowed herself when something landed harder than expected. Then she picked up her pen and wrote Hwang's name at the top of the list, with a line connecting it to the camera and a question mark connecting it to Dae-jung, and another question mark connecting it to the three families whose infiltration proposals Junha had identified. The question marks were because she needed evidence, not inference. Inference was how you understood a picture. Evidence was how you defended a position in a room full of people who had already decided what they believed. She needed both. Junha came to her desk at 11:40 with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the forearm, which meant he had been working in a way that had made the jacket inconvenient, which meant whatever he had been doing in his office for the last 2 hours had required the kind of focus that didn't accommodate formal clothing. He sat across from her without being invited. She didn't comment on that. She turned her notepad toward him. He read it. He read it twice. He looked up. "Hwang," he said. "His office received the stolen credentials report and didn't escalate it," she said. "That's either negligence or deliberate suppression. Given the timeline, I think we can characterize it." "The three families," he said, looking at the question mark. Choi, Lee, Han. All three proposals went through Dae-jung's facilitation. "Which doesn't make your uncle the coordinator," she said. "It makes him a useful channel. Whether he knows what he's being used for is a different question." Junha looked at the notepad. He looked at it with the specific expression of a man who has been carrying a weight for 18 months and is now watching someone else pick up part of it without being asked. And she could see in his face that he didn't entirely know what to do with that. "I need to get into Hwang's communication archive," she said. "Not the standard server, the secondary account. Every senior council member has one. They think they're private." He looked at her. "You know about the secondary accounts." "I know about a lot of things," she said. "I've worked here for 7 years." Something moved in his eyes. "If we access it without authorization, we're already in a building with an unauthorized surveillance camera whose installation was covered up by a council member," she said. "I think we've established that the other side is not operating on formal procedural grounds." She paused. "I'm not suggesting we do anything illegal. I'm suggesting we ask Kim Tae-won in IT security to run a standard anomaly audit on the secondary account system, which he has standing authority to do, and which, if Hwang has been using his secondary account to communicate with external parties about internal organizational matters, will produce a result." He looked at her. "When did you become this?" he said. "I've always been this," she said. "You just usually don't need it." He picked up his phone. Kim Tae-won was 28, ran the IT security function with a thoroughness that was occasionally inconvenient for people who preferred their digital behavior unexamined, and had, in Naomi's assessment, been quietly loyal to Junha for the entire 4 years of his tenure in a way that he had never been asked to articulate because it had never been required. It was required now. Junha called him directly. The conversation lasted 6 minutes. When it ended, Junha set down his phone and said, 72 hours. "Too long," she said. "He needs cover. If he runs the audit without a paper trail establishing cause, the results are challengeable." She thought about this. "The stolen credentials report that Hwang suppressed. If I file a formal escalation on it today, through proper channels, on record, that creates documented cause for an IT security review of all accounts associated with the incident, including secondary accounts." Junha was quiet for a moment. "Hwang will know what it means." "Yes?" she said. "He'll know we're looking." She held his gaze. "Do you want to catch him, or do you want to surprise him?" He thought about this for 3 seconds. "Catch him," he said. "If he panics and moves, he'll make contact with whoever he's reporting to, which gives us the connection." She nodded. She started drafting the escalation report. It took her 14 minutes. She filed it at 12:22 through the standard security incident management system, with her name on it and a timestamp that would be visible to anyone with access to that system. The line was baited. She did not think about what happened if the fish was bigger than the line. At 2:30, her phone rang. Internal line. Park Soo-jin from legal, which was unusual because Park Soo-jin communicated in documents and email and had called Naomi on the phone approximately twice in 7 years, both times because something was on fire in a way that couldn't wait for typing. She answered. Park Soo-jin's voice was low and had the specific texture of someone speaking from a position that was not their normal position. Not her office, somewhere smaller, somewhere she'd gone to not be overheard. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to understand that I'm telling you because I've watched you work here for 6 years, and you're the only person in this building I trust to do something useful with it." "Tell me," Naomi said. "Min Jun-seok had a meeting this morning after the council session, not in the building, outside at the place on Tehran Row, the private dining room on the second floor." "Who with?" "I don't know his name. I saw him leaving as I was arriving. I was there for a client lunch, different room, but I know his face." Park Soo-jin stopped. "He was at the Choi family's anniversary event last year. I handled the contract documentation for that event. He was introduced to me as a consultant. External. He had no affiliation listed in the introduction." Naomi's hand tightened on the phone. "What did he look like?" Park Soo-jin described him. Naomi wrote down the description on the notepad that was rapidly becoming the most important document in the building. 50s. Silver at the temples. A particular scar at the jawline on the left side, pale against his skin, healed old. She knew that description. She had seen that man twice. Once in the lobby, 8 months ago, introduced to her by Da-young as a logistics consultant. She had not been given a card for. Once outside the building 3 weeks ago, in a car that was parked across the street for 40 minutes before it drove away. She had noted it at the time the way she noted everything, filed it without a category, because she didn't have enough to make one. She had a category now. "Thank you," she said. "Is there going to be trouble?" Park Soo-jin said. "There's already trouble," Naomi said. "I'm trying to make sure it lands on the right people." She ended the call. She looked at the notepad. She thought about the man with the scar and Dae-jung's introduction, and the word consultant said, with the specific casualness that people use when they don't want you to remember something. She had remembered. She went to Junha's office. She knocked once. She opened the door without waiting, which she had never done in 7 years. And he looked up from whatever he was reading with the expression of someone who had been waiting for exactly this. She put the notepad on his desk. She pointed to the description. She watched him read it. She watched his face do something she had never seen it do. It went completely flat. Not the controlled professional flatness she was used to, but a different kind, the kind that comes before something that isn't professional at all. His jaw set. A muscle moved below his left eye. He breathed through his nose once, slowly. "You know him," she said. "His name is Sung Woo-jin," he said. "He ran external operations for my father's organization for 11 years. My father removed him." He stopped. "The reason he was removed is not public record." "What is it?" Junha looked at her. "I was selling information to a competing organization. He was caught because my father set a trap, fed him specific false intelligence, and watched to see where it appeared." He paused. "He disappeared after the removal. We assumed he left the country." "He didn't," she said. "No," he said, "he didn't." She sat down across from his desk. "He's been here, planning this, using Dae-jung and Hwang and the marriage proposals as a mechanism to destabilize your leadership, not just to gain influence, to execute a takeover." Junha stood up from his desk. He moved to the window the way he always moved to the window when he was working through something he didn't want on his face while he worked through it. Seoul sat below in the flat afternoon light, indifferent and enormous. "My uncle," he said. "Does he know who he's working with?" "I don't know," she said, "but I don't think it matters anymore. Woo-jin met with Min Jun-seok today. If he's making direct contact with council members, he's accelerating. Whatever move he's been building toward, it's closer than we thought." Junha's hands were at his sides. She could see the tension in them from across the room, the specific stillness of hands that want to be doing something and are being held in check by a mind that needs another 3 seconds to finish a thought. "He's going to try to take it at the council level," he said. "Another vote. Except this time, he'll have the numbers pre-arranged. He's been working Hwang and Min for months, and now he's made direct contact, which means the others are already spoken to or are being spoken to today." He turned from the window. "I have 3 days, maybe 4, before he has enough of the council to move." "Then we need to move first," she said. "With what?" he said. "The audit won't be finished. The camera evidence is circumstantial. I have 18 months of investigation material, but none of it is in a form I can present to a council that has already been compromised. She looked at him. Let me see the investigation material, she said. He was quiet. Junha. It was the first time in 7 years she had said his name without a title attached. In this building, in this office. She heard herself say it, and she did not take it back. Let me see what you have. I've been organizing information in this building for 7 years. Tell me what you have, and I will tell you what's missing and how to get it. He crossed the room. He opened his desk drawer. He took out a drive. He set it on the desk between them. She picked it up. The next 31 hours were the kind she would not remember cleanly afterward, not because she suppressed them, but because they did not separate into discrete moments the way normal time does. They compressed into a single sustained state of working, the kind of focus that doesn't feel like focus, because it doesn't feel like anything except the problem in front of you and the next thing the problem requires. She and Junha and Kim Tae-won at the other end of a secure line, and Park Soo-jin, who came in at 7 that evening and looked at what Naomi had spread across the conference room table and said nothing for 30 seconds, and then sat down and started helping, because she was the kind of person who, when presented with evidence of a wrong that she could do something about, did something about it. The investigation material Junha had accumulated was thorough, and it was damning, and it was also, in its current form, a collection of pieces that did not yet make a shape a council could be required to look at. Financial records showing money moving through accounts connected to the 3 families, and then to an offshore structure that resolved with 2 intermediate steps, to Sung Woo-jin's consulting entity. Communication intercepts that Junha's own security team had obtained, legally, through proper surveillance authority granted by the founding charter, that showed coordination between Woo-jin's people and contacts inside the building, the stolen credentials incident, the camera installation, the suppressed report. Separately, each piece had a defense, a lawyer, and all 3 of those families had exceptional lawyers, could pick each one apart in isolation. Together, they were a different thing. Naomi built the together. She worked the way she worked everything, methodically, without sentiment, following the logic of the material to its natural conclusion, rather than the conclusion she wanted it to have. She cross-referenced. She sequenced. She found the places where the evidence chain had a gap, and she found what was needed to fill the gap, and she either found it in the material or she sent Kim Tae-won to look for it in the system audit that was now running on every secondary account connected to the incident. At 2 in the morning, Kim Tae-won sent her something from the audit. She read it. She read it twice. She called Junha in from the adjacent room where he had been working, and she put the result on the table in front of him. It was a sequence of messages from Hwang Byung-chul's secondary account to an external encrypted address. The messages spanned 14 months. In the messages, Hwang reported on council dynamics, voting alignments, Junha's operational decisions, and Sharm in 3 separate exchanges that were dated 4 months ago, 3 months ago, and 6 weeks ago. Specific discussion of the marriage proposals and how to use the rejections to build a confidence vote. The external encrypted address resolved, through the audit's trace protocol, to a server registered in Singapore to a corporate entity whose directors included one name she recognized, Sung Woo-jin. She looked at Junha. That's the connection, she said. He looked at the document for a long time. My uncle's name, he said. Is it there? She looked at him. She understood what he was asking, and she understood what it would mean, either answer. No, she said, not directly. Hwang's messages referenced the elders' cooperation twice, but no name. Junha closed his eyes for approximately 2 seconds. When he opened them, whatever had been there was gone, processed, and packed away with the speed of a man who had been doing that with difficult information his entire life. He might not know, he said. My uncle. He might be Woo-jin's instrument without understanding what Woo-jin is actually building. Or he knows exactly, she said. Yes, he said, or that. She let him sit with it. She poured coffee that had been sitting long enough to be bad and drank it anyway because it was 2 in the morning and the alternative was nothing. We need to call an emergency council session, she said, before Woo-jin makes his move, before he has the numbers locked. If I call a session now, Hwang and Min will know something has changed, he said. They'll contact Woo-jin. Good, she said. Let them. If Woo-jin moves to protect himself, he'll make contact with the families. If he makes contact with the families, it activates a jurisdictional provision in the founding charter. External party interference in an active council proceeding triggers mandatory disclosure and investigation. It removes the vote from the standard council process entirely. She paused. It puts the decision in your hands alone. Junha looked at her. You know the charter, he said. I've read it, she said, Pete. Twice. Both times at 3 in the morning, for reasons I didn't fully understand at the time. He was quiet. When do we call it? He said. Tomorrow morning, she said. 8 o'clock, same time as the last one. He won't be expecting it that fast. No, she said. He won't. They looked at each other across the table with the evidence between them and the city outside doing what it always did in the specific quality of 2 in the morning around them. The way that hour strips the usual performances down to something that is more difficult to maintain and more difficult to avoid. You should go home, he said. Sleep for a few hours. So should you, she said. I will, he said. After. She stood. She gathered her notes. She put the drive in her bag, and the drive had more on it now than it had 12 hours ago, because she had been adding to it as the picture clarified, assembling the case the way she assembled everything, completely, without gaps, with the particular stubbornness of someone who believes that incomplete is the same as wrong. She was at the door when he said her name. She turned. He was still at the table, not standing, not moving toward her, just sitting there with the evidence in front of him and the city behind him and his face doing the thing it had been doing since the conference room, the thing without insulation, the thing she had been refusing to name. When this is over, he said. Same words as before, same certainty in them. There are things I should have said years ago. You said one of them today? She said, in front of 11 people. That was the easy one, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Get some sleep, she said. We need you coherent tomorrow. She left. In the elevator, she pressed the button for the lobby and leaned against the wall and thought about the word easy and the implication of what that made the other things, and the fact that she was going to have to walk into a room tomorrow morning and do the most consequential thing she had done in 7 years, and the fact that somewhere under all of that she was aware, with an acuity that made the professional parts of her brain deeply uncomfortable, that she was not indifferent to any of it. Not to the case, not to the risk, not to him. She had stopped being indifferent a long time ago. She had just been very disciplined about where she kept it. The lobby was empty. She walked through it and out into Seoul at 3 in the morning, and the city received her the way it always did, with the enormous indifferent continuity of a place that is always running and never asks whether you are keeping up. And she walked to the subway with her bag on her shoulder and the drive inside it, and everything that needed to happen in the next 6 hours organized in her head with the precision of someone who has learned, over 7 years, that the only thing standing between a well-built plan and a disaster is the quality of attention you bring to it. The train was nearly empty. She sat. She looked at her reflection in the dark window opposite. She thought, tomorrow, it ends or it breaks open into something worse. She thought, either way, nothing goes back to the way it was. She thought, I knew that when I sat in that chair beside him. The train moved through the dark under Seoul, and she closed her eyes for 40 seconds, and when she opened them, her stop was coming, and she stood up, and she was ready. At 8:03, Kang Dae-jung walked in and looked at the table and looked at the materials and looked at his nephew and at Naomi beside him, and his face did what faces do. When the thing you have been building toward has been preempted by something you did not see coming, it went very still. At 8:04, Hwang Byung-chul took his phone out of his pocket under the table. Naomi had been watching for that. She said clearly, and without raising her voice, Mr. Hwang, I'd ask you to leave your phone on the table where it's visible. The session is being formally recorded, and we want to ensure that all communications during the proceeding are part of the record. Hwang looked at her. He looked at Junha. He put his phone on the table. Junha stood. He did not look at the materials. He had read them, and he did not need them in front of him. He looked at the room with the complete and steady attention of a man who has decided what this moment is and is not managing it from behind glass anymore. What I'm about to show you, he said, is not a response to yesterday's meeting. It is the conclusion of an 18-month investigation into an active attempt to destroy this organization from the inside. He paused. And I am going to need every person in this room to understand the difference between what Kang Dae-jung has been arguing and what Sung Woo-jin has been building. The name landed in the room. And in the silence that followed it, Naomi watched Kang Dae-jung's face very carefully, because the answer to the most important remaining question was going to be in that face in the next 3 seconds. She watched. She saw it. The expression of a man who has just heard a name he did not expect to hear, in a room he thought he had already won, with a shock in it that was not performed and could not have been, because no one was that good an actor in that kind of instant. He hadn't known. Dae-jung had not known who he was working with. She looked at Jun-ha. She found his eyes. She gave him the smallest movement of her head. 1 degree, nothing a camera would catch, nothing anyone else in the room would read, and watched him receive it and understand it and incorporate it into whatever calculation he was running, the way they had always communicated across rooms, without language, with the specificity of people who have learned each other's frequencies over time. He held her gaze for 1 second. Then he turned back to the room and began. He began with the money. That was the right place to start, she had told him at 4 in the morning when they were building the sequence. Because money was the language that rooms like this one trusted most. Not testimony, not photographs, not the emotional weight of betrayal. Money. Numbers. The specific and irrefutable logic of where it went and who it served. He walked them through it without theater. The financial diagram she had built was projected on the wall screen, and he moved through it the way he moved through everything that mattered to him, with total precision and without performance. The offshore structure, the intermediate accounts, the corporate entity registered in Singapore, the name at the end of the chain, Sung Woo-jin. He explained who Woo-jin was. I explained what Woo-jin had done under his father's leadership and what the consequences had been, and why the name had disappeared from the organization's active record. He said it without visible emotion, and Naomi watched the room receive it, watched the council members' faces process the information in real time. The specific expressions of people learning that a threat they had not known to watch for had been operating in proximity to them for an extended period. Then he moved to the internal architecture of it. Hwang Byung-chul's secondary account. The message chain. The 14 months of reporting on council dynamics and voting alignments, and the specific use of the marriage proposals as a destabilization instrument. He put the evidence on the table, physical copies to each council member, the same tabbed and dated organization she had built, each section building on the last. Hwang said nothing through this. He sat with his phone on the table in front of him and his hands in his lap and his face doing the work of a man managing the discovery that the room he is in has walls on sides he didn't know about. Min Jun-seok said, at the point where the diagram showed his meeting at the restaurant on Tehran Row, I don't know who that man is. You met with him yesterday, Jun-ha said. I met with a consultant, Min said. I was referred by... He stopped. By whom? Jun-ha said. The silence lasted 4 seconds. By Hwang, Min said. Hwang closed his eyes. Jun-ha let that sit in the room for a moment. Then he turned to the last section of the presentation, the founding charter provision, the one Naomi had found at 3 in the morning and understood and built the strategy around. External party interference in an active council proceeding. He read the language of the provision aloud, which he had not needed to prepare because she had highlighted the relevant text, and he had read it twice and memorized it because that was who he was. He explained what it meant, that the provision existed because the organization's founders had understood, from experience, that a compromised council could not adjudicate a matter in which the compromise itself was the subject of the proceeding, that the provision removed the vote from the council and placed it in the authority of the organization's chief executive until the interference had been investigated and resolved, that this provision had never been invoked because it had never needed to be. It needed to be now. He looked at Dae-jung when he said the last part. Dae-jung had not spoken since the name Sung Woo-jin had entered the room. He had sat at his end of the table with the stillness of a man whose entire framework for a situation has been removed from underneath him and who is working, with the discipline of decades, to not show what that feels like. His hands were flat, his face was controlled, but his eyes had been doing something for the last 40 minutes that she had been watching with the careful attention she gave to things that mattered. They were the eyes of a man reassembling information he thought he already understood and arriving, piece by piece, at a picture he had not chosen. When Junha finished, the room was quiet. In the way rooms are quiet, when a great deal has been said, and a great deal remains to be said, and no one is entirely sure who should say it first. Dai-Jung said, "I didn't know." He said it to his nephew, not to the room. Not in the procedural language of the meeting, just directly, with the specific weight of a man in his 60s putting down something heavy and not trying to dress the putting down in anything that would make it easier to look at. "I know," Junha said. "He came to me as a business development contact. 11 months ago. He had a different name." Dai-Jung paused. "I recognized him. Eventually. When I did, he told me the connection to your father's organization was historical, resolved, that he had interests that aligned with the syndicate's stability." He stopped again. "I believed him." "You wanted to believe him," Junha said, "because he gave you a framework for what you already wanted to do." Dai-Jung looked at him. "Yes," he said. "That's accurate." It was the most honest thing she had ever heard the man say. Junha held his uncle's gaze for a long time, long enough that the room became aware of something passing between them that was not for the room, something old and family-shaped and complicated in the way that only things between people who share blood and history are complicated. Then he looked at the full council and he invoked the provision. The formal process that followed took 4 hours and was, in the way of formal processes, both necessary and brutal. Huang Byung-chul submitted his resignation from the council before the first procedural session concluded. He did it through his attorney, by email, which arrived on Naomi's phone because she was the executive communications point for all council correspondence. And she read it and forwarded it to the relevant parties and did not feel anything about it, except the specific relief of a variable that had been causing structural instability resolving itself cleanly. Min Jun-seok requested a formal meeting with Junha to provide a full account of his communications with the man he had known as a consultant. He was granted it. Naomi sat in the meeting and took notes and assessed, over the course of 90 minutes, that Min was telling the truth, that he had been approached and cultivated over several months, and had allowed himself to be positioned without fully understanding what he was being positioned for. That was not innocence, but it was different from Huang's deliberate, documented cooperation. She noted the distinction. It would matter for what came after. The families, Choi, Lee, Han, were formally notified through legal channels that their representatives' external activities had triggered the charter provision and that their business relationships with the syndicate were under review. The Choi family's attorney called at 2 in the afternoon, and the call lasted 11 minutes, and Naomi listened to Junha handle it with the specific patience of someone who has the stronger hand and knows it and doesn't need to perform the knowing. The call ended with the attorney saying they would cooperate fully with the review. Junha said that was wise. He ended the call. He looked at Naomi across his desk. 3 down, he said. Woo Jin, she said. He nodded. Woo Jin. They found Sung Woo Jin the same afternoon, through a channel that was not the kind of channel that appeared in formal records, and that Naomi did not ask the specific operational details of, because in 7 years she had learned precisely which operational details were hers to know, and which belonged to the part of Junha's world that she had always understood existed without needing to have it mapped for her. What she knew was that he was found. What she knew was that the meeting happened in a location that was not the building and was not recorded in any system she maintained. What she knew was that Junha returned from it at 7 in the evening with a small cut on his left hand, not serious, already closed, that he addressed with the first aid kit in his desk drawer, with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone for whom minor physical damage is an occupational category rather than an event. She watched him close the kit. "Is it handled?" she said. "It's handled," he said. She looked at his hand, she looked at his face. She did not ask more than that, and he did not offer more than that. And the understanding between them, the one that had been operating without words for 7 years, held. "Woo Jin won't be a problem," he said. "For the organization or for anything else?" She nodded. She thought about the man her father had removed 11 years ago, and the man who had returned under a different name and spent the better part of a year constructing an architecture of destruction inside the organization her father had built. And she thought about what it cost to carry that kind of history and keep it from becoming something that consumed you from the inside. And she thought about Junha carrying it for 18 months without putting it down in front of anyone. You should have told me sooner, she said. I know, he said, not because I could have helped earlier necessarily. Maybe I couldn't have, but because you were carrying it alone and you didn't have to. He was quiet. I was protecting you, he said. I know that too, she said. I'm telling you it wasn't necessary. I'm not something that needs to be protected from the reality of what this organization is. I've worked here for 7 years. I know what it is. He looked at her across the desk with the expression she had finally, sometime in the last 48 hours, somewhere between 4 in the morning and the conference room and the evidence and his voice saying love her in front of 11 people, stopped refusing to name. I know you do, he said. The protecting wasn't about the organization. She held his gaze. What was it about? He was quiet for a moment. If you knew how bad it could get, he said, if you had seen all of it, the full picture, what I've had to do and what I may still have to do, I was afraid that you would see it and decide it was more than you wanted to be near. The office was quiet, Seoul outside doing its relentless thing. I've been near it for 7 years, she said. I didn't leave. You didn't know everything. I knew enough, she said. I'm not naive about who you are. I've never been naive about it. She paused. The question isn't whether I can see the full picture. The question is whether you can stop trying to manage what I'm allowed to see. He looked at her for a long time. That's going to be harder than the rest of it, he said. I know, she said. I'm not asking you to be someone different. I'm asking you to stop making decisions about what I can handle. He stood up from his desk. He came around it the way he'd come around the conference table 2 days ago. Not quickly, the considered pace of someone who has decided a thing and is doing it in the right time rather than the convenient time. And he stopped when he was in front of her, close enough that the professional distance that had organized their relationship for 7 years was simply gone, and there was nothing in its place except the actual distance between two people, which was very small. The things I was going to say, he said, before the phone rang, before the meeting, before all of it. Say them now, she said. He looked at her. I have been in love with you, he said, for a long time. Not in a way I could manage well. Not in a way that made me easy to be around, I think. Because it was too much, and I didn't know what to do with too much. So I did what I always do with things I don't know what to do with, which is contain them and work around them and pretend they don't have the weight they have. He stopped. I rejected every proposal because none of them were you, and I knew it from the beginning, and I couldn't explain it to anyone without explaining why. And I couldn't explain why without saying the thing I had spent years not saying because I was afraid of what happened after I said it. What were you afraid would happen? She said. That it would change what we had, he said. That you would leave or stay and be uncomfortable. Or that what I felt was too much for someone whose feelings for me might be professional and nothing else. And I didn't know how to find out without the finding out being the thing that broke it. She looked at him. She thought about 7 years of small things assembled by someone else as weapons and understood now as something different. The coffee. The rerouted shipment. The way he said her name in certain tones. The way he'd looked at her in 100 rooms when he thought she wasn't watching, and all the time she had been watching and told herself she was not. My feelings for you, she said, have not been professional for a long time. He was very still. I know what you are, she said. I know what this organization is. I know the choices you've made and some of the ones you haven't told me about, and I have stayed for 7 years. And I want you to understand that I stayed because I chose to stay. Every year, every time I could have left. Because this place and this work and you were worth staying for. She paused. That is not a professional calculation. He reached up and touched her face, not dramatically, not in the way of a scene building to something. Just his hand against her jaw, the specific, careful touch of a man who has been holding back a gesture for years and is finally making it and doesn't want to make it wrong. I should have said it sooner, he said. Yes, she said. You should have. I'm saying it now. I know, she said. I heard you. In front of 11 people. That was the easy one, he said. You said that last night, she said. It was true last night, he said. This is the harder one. Saying it here, to you, when there's no audience and no strategic reason for it, and it's just... He stopped. True. She covered his hand with hers, where it was against her face, and she felt the warmth of it and the slight roughness of the cut on his palm, healed but present. And she thought about what kind of world this was, and what kind of man he was inside it, and what kind of person she had become in 7 years of standing beside him, and whether any of that added up to something she could build a life from. It did. She was sure it did. She turned her head slightly and pressed her mouth to the inside of his wrist. Just once, briefly, and felt him go completely still in the specific way of someone receiving something they had not let themselves expect. "Okay," she said. "So, what do we do now?" He looked at her. Something moved in his face that was not controlled and not constructed, and was the most human thing she had seen there in 7 years. Relief, enormous and exhausted. The relief of someone who has been holding something for a very long time and has just been told it is safe to put it down. "Marry me," he said. She blinked. "That's very fast," she said. "It's been 7 years," he said. "That's a fair point," she said. "Naomi." "I'm thinking," she said. "You're not thinking," he said. "You already know." She looked at him. He was right. She did already know. She had probably known for longer than she was prepared to admit in this office with Sol outside the windows, and the evidence files still on the desk, and his hand against her face. "Yes," she said. He exhaled. It was the smallest sound, barely audible, but she heard it the way she heard everything about him, with the attention of 7 years, and it was the sound of something enormous releasing. They were married 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday, at the coast. Not a ceremony with the weight of the organization behind it. Not yet. That was coming, but later. This was the other thing first, the real thing, the one that was only for them, on a stretch of coast 2 hours south of Seoul, where the wind came off the water cold and the sky was doing its flat gray early autumn thing, and the grass near the path to the water was bent sideways in the same direction. There were 4 people present, Naomi and Junha, and 2 witnesses, one of whom was Park Soo-jin, who had shown up with a single white flower she'd bought from a gas station on the drive down, and had presented it to Naomi with the expression of a woman who had decided that this occasion deserved a flower regardless of the context, and that was the most ceremonial thing about the day. The officiant was a local registrar who had been provided the documentation in advance, and who conducted the proceeding with the brisk professionalism of someone for whom this was a Tuesday morning task, which it was, and which suited both of them exactly. Naomi wore a dress she had bought the previous Saturday in approximately 40 minutes. It was pale blue, simple, and she had chosen it because it was the first thing she tried on that didn't make her feel like she was performing an idea of herself. Junha wore a dark suit without a tie. He had shaved closely. His hands, when he took hers, were very still, not the controlled stillness of the conference room, a different kind, the stillness of a man who is exactly where he means to be. The registrar asked the questions. They answered them. The wind was loud enough that she had to say her yes slightly louder than she would have in a room, and she felt the loudness of it in her chest in a way that had nothing to do with volume. He put the ring on her finger. She put one on his. They looked at each other. He leaned forward and kissed her, once, properly, and she felt the coastal wind and the cold of the morning and the warmth of his mouth and the specific quality of a thing she had held at arm's length for 7 years, finally arriving inside her life without conditions. Park Soo-jin made a sound behind them that she would describe afterward, when asked, as not crying. On the drive back, Naomi sat in the passenger seat and looked at the ring on her hand and looked at the road and said nothing for a long time. He drove the way he did everything, with complete attention and without the need to fill silence with anything that wasn't necessary. "Are you all right?" he said, eventually. "Yes," she said. "You're quiet." "I'm always quiet," she said. "You're quieter than usual." She looked at him. "I'm thinking about what happens next," she said. "What do you want to happen next?" She looked back at the road. "I want to keep working," she said. "Not as your assistant. That's over. I can't go back to that configuration. It doesn't work anymore, and it wouldn't be honest. But I've been operating at the center of this organization for 7 years, and I know how it works, and I think I can be useful to it in a form that isn't—" She paused, finding the language subordinate. He was quiet. "I've thought about it," he said. "There's a role that doesn't currently exist. Director of Operations Strategy. It would cover the kind of work you did with the Wu Jin investigation, intelligence organization, evidence architecture, threat assessment. It's the kind of function the organization should have had formally for years, and doesn't, because nobody thought to formalize it." She looked at him. "You made up a job for me." I described a job that the organization needs, he said. You happen to be the most qualified person available. You can't just decide that. I can, he said. The charter provision I invoked gives me executive authority over organizational structure for 60 days during an interference investigation. I can formalize new roles, he paused. It's technically correct. She looked at him for a long moment. You're very annoying, she said. You knew that, he said. Yes, she said. I did. The council convened its first formal session under the restructured configuration 6 weeks later. There had been changes. Hwang Byung-chul's seat was vacant pending a replacement nomination process. Min Jun-seok remained, having completed his full account and accepted a formal censure that would sit in the record, which was the outcome Naomi had recommended, because it was proportionate and because an organization that removes everyone involved in a failure learns nothing, while an organization that documents the failure and keeps the people who can learn from it might. Junha had agreed with her. She suspected he had already reached the same conclusion independently, but had wanted her to reach it herself. The three families, Choi, Lee, Han, had all submitted to the review. The Choi family's business relationship with the syndicate was suspended indefinitely. Lee and Han accepted modified terms that removed the individuals most closely connected to Woo Jin's network from their representative roles. It was not a clean outcome. Clean outcomes were not a feature of the world that Naomi had been working in for 7 years, and she had stopped expecting them before the end of her first year. What it was resolution, the kind that held. Dae-jung was still on the council. That was the decision that raised the most questions. Internally, from the people who had watched the vote of confidence motion and drawn their conclusions about what it meant. But Junha had made it, and Naomi had understood it before he explained it to her, because she had watched his uncle's face in the room when the name Sung Woo Jin appeared, and she had seen what was true. He had been used. He had been used because his ambitions and his resentments and his old guard convictions about how power should be organized had made him useful, and he had not questioned his usefulness because he had wanted so badly to be right about what the organization needed. That was a failure of judgment, a significant one, and it was going to carry consequences for a long time. But it was not the same as the deliberate calculated betrayal that Hwang had committed. It was not the same as Woo Jin. In the first restructured council session, Dae-jung sat in his usual place and was quieter than she had ever seen him and said nothing for the first 40 minutes except when he was directly asked for input. After the session, when most of the council had gone, he found Naomi in the corridor outside the conference room. She stopped. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man who has something to say and is deciding whether to say it in the language he normally used, the calculated, measured language of organizational power, or in a different language that he was less practiced in. He chose the second one. I owe you an apology, he said. She said nothing. She let him have the space to say it. I used you, he said, in that first meeting, as a prop in an argument. I made you visible in a room full of people in a way that was designed to be uncomfortable for you. He paused. That was wrong. Yes, she said. It was. He looked at her. You're not what I expected, he said. When Junha hired you, 7 years ago, I thought you were a mistake in judgment on his part, an efficiency preference over what the role should represent. I know, she said. I was wrong about that, he said. What you did in the investigation, the way you built it. He couldn't have done it without you, or not as fast, and the speed was the difference. He stopped. I'm not good at this, he said. Saying this kind of thing. I can see that, she said. Something moved in his face that was not quite amusement and not quite appreciation, and was the first expression she had seen from him in 7 years that was not designed. You're going to be difficult, he said. Probably, she said. But I'm also going to be here, so I think you'll adjust. He looked at her for another moment. Then he nodded. Once, the specific nod of a man concluding something with more weight than the gesture showed. And he walked down the corridor and turned the corner, and she heard his footsteps recede. She stood in the corridor for a moment with the empty building around her. She thought, 7 years ago, she had walked into this building needing a job and found something she hadn't planned for and couldn't name, and spent 7 years working around it with a discipline that had cost her things she hadn't fully accounted for at the time. She thought, she was still here. She thought, That had always been the choice. The announcement went to the full organization on a Thursday morning. Brief, formal, the style of communication that KJH Holdings used for structural changes. A statement of the new organizational configuration, the new role, and at the bottom, without elaboration or emphasis, the personal information. Kang Jun-ha and Naomi Carter were married. She was in her new office, not her old desk, an actual office, on the same corridor as his, with a window, when the announcement went out. She had requested a window. He had given her one with a view of the Han River, which was more window than she had asked for, and which she had not commented on because some battles were not worth winning. She was reading the morning's operational reports when the first message came in. Park Soo-jin, I am not crying, I want that on the record. Then Kim Tae-won, whose messages were always precise and professionally appropriate except this one, which was a single character, an exclamation mark, which from him was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Then a sequence of others, people she had worked with for years, people she had scheduled and organized and passed in hallways and shared elevator silences with, whose responses to the announcement ranged from formal to warm too. In two cases, the specific tone of people who were going to be telling this story for years. She looked at the messages and she felt something she didn't have a precise word for. Not triumph, not relief, not happiness exactly, though happiness was in it. Something more complex than any of those, the way real things are usually more complex than the words available for them. She looked out at the river. She thought about this woman who had walked into this building 7 years ago, 26, impractical, and not looking for anything except a job that paid what she needed. She thought about what she had found, and what it had cost, and what it had made of her. She thought about 7 years of small observations assembled over time into something large and true. His door opened. He came into her office, their corridor now, the shared territory they were still negotiating the texture of. And he looked at her at her desk, and she looked at him in her doorway. And the morning was doing the things Seoul mornings did in early autumn, gray and cool, and with the specific quality of light that came off the river when the sun was still finding its angle. How is it? He said. Operational reports are normal, she said. 3 outstanding items from the review process, all on track. The Busan contract closed yesterday. Park Soo-jin sent the confirmation this morning. He looked at her. That's not what I asked, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. It's good, she said. It's strange, and it's a lot, and it's good. She paused. You? He crossed and sat in the chair across from her desk. The same configuration as her old desk, him across from her, except now it was her office, and her desk and the chair was not the one where operational visitors sat. He sat in it with the ease of a man who had decided this was where he wanted to be. Strange, he said, and a lot. A pause. And good. She looked at him. She thought about all the versions of sitting across from him she had experienced in 7 years, and the specific newness of this one, the way the same geometry produced a completely different feeling when the context was different. There's a gala next month, she said, the Industry Association event. We would normally attend separately. We won't be attending separately, he said. No, she said. We won't. She paused. That's going to be a conversation. Several conversations, he said. I'm prepared for them. Are you? He looked at her steadily. I told a room full of people I loved you before I'd told you, he said. I think I can manage a gala. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the conference room and the photographs on the table and his voice saying love her with the quiet certainty of someone stating a fact they had been holding for a very long time. You really said that the easy one first, she said. I did, he said. Tactical error. Extremely, she said. He smiled. Actually smiled. Not the contained almost movement she was used to, but the real thing, the one she had seen exactly 5 times in 7 years, and which still had the same effect on her that it had the first time she'd seen it, which was that her entire professional composure briefly ceased to function. She looked at her desk. She looked at the river. She looked back at him. The review process closes in 9 days, she said. After that, the charter provision lapses and council authority normalizes. Yes, he said. We should talk about the transition structure, she said. The new council seat nominations, the relationship protocols for the families under modified terms, the formalized scope of the operations strategy role. Naomi. he said. She stopped. That's all going to get done, he said. All of it. You're going to make sure of it, and so am I. He held her gaze. It doesn't have to get done right now. Right now, it's 8:40 in the morning, and we have been operating in crisis mode for 3 weeks, and we are allowed, for a few minutes, to just... He stopped. Be this. She looked at him. She thought about the word this, the thing it pointed at. The shape of a morning in an office with a window over the river, with a man she had chosen and who had chosen her, in a life that looked nothing like what she had walked into 7 years ago, and everything like what she had built inside it. Okay, she said. He looked at her. Is that it? He said. Just okay? You told me to just be this, she said. I'm being it. It feels like okay. He looked at her for a moment. You're the most aggravating person I have ever known, he said. It was not a complaint. You married me, she said. That's your problem now. He looked at her with the expression she had spent 7 years refusing to name and had been naming quietly for the last 3 weeks, in the privacy of her own head, without finding a word large enough for it. Yes, he said. It is. Outside, Seoul continued. The river moved under the autumn sky with the same indifference it had always had, the specific indifference of large things that do not require acknowledgement to keep going. The city spread in every direction, enormous and ordinary and constant, full of lives being lived at the same time as this one, none of them knowing about this window or this office or these two people sitting across from each other in the morning. She turned back to her desk. She pulled up the review process files. She noted the 9 days and the outstanding items and the specific shape of the work that still needed doing. He was still sitting in the chair across from her when she looked up. Don't you have a meeting? She said. At 10, he said. It's 8:43, she said. I know, he said. He was not moving. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the elevator 7 years ago, going down, pressing the back of her hand to her mouth, and telling herself firmly that nothing had changed. She thought about how wrong she had been, and how long she had worked to be wrong in that specific way, maintaining the distance that she had told herself was professional and appropriate, and not costing her anything significant. She thought, it cost me exactly this much time. She looked back at her files. 17 minutes, she said. 17 minutes, he said. And they were quiet in the way they had always been quiet together. The way that had always been different from the way she was quiet with anyone else. The way that had never needed filling. The way she had filed away and not named for 7 years, and was naming now without ceremony, in an office with a window over the river, on an ordinary Thursday morning in Seoul. The city kept going outside. The river moved. The morning held.